Continuing with this thread on the importance of doing what you want the way you want to do it, I want to emphasize today that this is not also something to be just instrumentalized. Right? If there is, let's say, let's particularly look at a historical example. Say it's an old Ford plant, early Ford, like Model T. And let's say that starts a whole town around manufacturing these automobiles. And decides that the workers will be more productive if they're given an outlet of some kind. That the workers will be more able to function at their factory positions if they bring in some movies, or if they create a playground for the kids of the families, or things like that. And what I want to emphasize is that when I'm talking about the importance of doing what you want to do, and about how it's fulfilling to us, about how it's enriching to us, about how it lets us explore and grow and develop our identity, about how it helps us find our voice and helps us in all kinds of ways developmentally, it is not in service to harnessable efforts for the capital machine, right? It's not just about, is this going to boost my productivity? Is that why I should do it? Is it going to increase my earnings someday? Now, as I'm often happy to point out in the case of game development, and for many other kinds of hobbies as well, there may certainly be advantages that come from getting more experience with teamwork, getting more experience with leadership, getting more experience at organizing and planning and scheduling and programming and design work and artwork and all kinds of different things. Even just comfort with technology, right? I mean, many people, for our habits, for our hobbies, heck, even just playing video games growing up as kids meant that we had a certain amount of proficiency or comfort with plugging and unplugging and finding and switching the TV settings in a way that some other people growing up did not have that advantage. Our hobbies can definitely enrich our comfort with various things that may have applicability to what we're comfortable studying or working in, but that cannot be its only purpose. That it is not sufficient to justify it, or necessary to justify it as being, as I've said, in service to how does it affect my number of widgets I can produce for the factory? How does it affect my ability to serve the organization's objective? One of the curious things to come out of, and I'm sympathetic to it because my career frankly benefited from it too, is this effect among people early in their careers, quite often, not necessarily only, but quite often undergraduates, where I remember there was sort of a lot of feeling of pressure among us to see which big brand could we run off and help the stock price of. Some of our people would get jobs at Microsoft or Google or Amazon or Apple or EA or Activision or other places, and nothing wrong with working those places. Lots of good, sensible, smart folks work at those places. But there's a very particular mindset that, like I say, really from a distance comes down to some form of which giant brand do we want to increase the value of? And in many ways, some of the same folks who kind of operationalize their free time into seeing how it would feed back into climbing the ladder in this kind of organization in a way that they either kind of lost themselves in it, and we cease to hear about their interests or their hobbies or their passions outside of what serves the work, or that they would kind of wind up so heavily leaning on that as part of their identity that if or when, and sometimes at no one's fault of their own, a giant company's scale, pretty routinely, especially in games, but in other fields as well, entire divisions get kind of swept away, right? Because they've investigated a thing. Maybe they're building some sort of satellite technology or building some sort of infrastructure. Some sort of suit at a desk with big levers makes some decisions about, like, well, we gotta, based on our KPIs and OKRs and whatever, gotta pull money out of this thing and reinvest in that and sweep away this whole division. And in the process, some of those people, when they get disconnected from their brand, have figured out that they have stopped building up their own sense of who they are and what they do and their abilities and their competencies and their interests outside of what they are doing for that larger establishment. And so all I'm trying to come back to for all this is that if you've got an interest, whether or not it overlaps with what you're doing for work is almost, I'd say, secondary. Unimportant in the scheme of making sure that you are still doing something you want to do because you want to do it, the way you want to do it, in a way that really you feel like you are in, you are a part of, you have ownership in, is maybe what I've been in a roundabout way of getting back to. That when I look back on the projects I've worked on, the many, many projects I've worked on, the larger the team and the more outside factors and forces were involved in its creation, the less ownership I felt over it. The less I feel like, and rightfully so, it was in any way my project, my creation, my output, an expression of my identity, as opposed to the customers, the executive producers, the publishers, or perhaps in the case of multi-100-person teams, no one's in particular, as it sort of amorphously evolved through a series of processes and pressures and things like that, as opposed to when it's this tiny team, when it's just a few people, which again, there's still some sort of trade-off to. I've done some deeply personal solo projects, but they've always, you can tell from looking at it, that's one person's work, because it has some major weaknesses that the strengths are trying to compensate for. It's always a smaller scale, always took me longer than if I did it with a team. But there's still a lot of ownership in this small team, where still like, this whole character is mine. This whole area is mine. This whole concept, this whole mechanic, this whole power-up, this whole, I could do the art for it, and the sound for it, and the implementation, and the placement, and all these kind of things around it in a way that you can't, the bigger a project gets and the more close it gets to what, to go back to our Ford example, at industrial scale, at industrial quality, requires so much separation of the craftsperson, the artisan, in many cases from the specialization of the process, where they have to be able to be plugged in, so that the best animator, the best modeler, the best texturer, the best voice actor, the best coder, the best person within the studio is only the one getting to touch that aspect of it. And you just don't get the same level of ownership over, this is my piece, that's my chunk. I brought this in, I had this idea, I made it happen, I did all the things related to it, collaborated with others to connect it together into something bigger than I could have done alone. It's a different kind of satisfaction that we scratch that way. And so, yeah, back to that base message. It's not just about what's going to help me recover. It's not just about what's going to be able to be operationally justified as this helps the bottom line, this helps increase earnings somehow. It, again, may. It is important to rest and have relaxation and break, but I think it is in many ways important to not get so caught up in the classic question of defining ourselves in our work, or thinking of our main passions as something we are working on a painting, working on a new track, working on a new game, as opposed to it being something more important than that. That the work is in service of it, and not the other way around. But at this point, we might be on the thread of something different, in which case, I'll talk about that another day. But for now, as every day, I hope that you are finding a way to make work, to make fit. Use the word myself there. You know, making things you want to make the way you want to make them, or doing things you want to do the way you want to do them.